If you've never seen someone try to tow a dead man's memory off a lawn in broad daylight with a clipboard and a fake smile, well, buckle up. Before I tell you how I made an entire HOA apologize and cut me a $25,000 0-cents check, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Especially if you've ever had to fight for something that belonged to your family. See, I didn't plan to start a war. I planned to teach my daughter to sail. But the president of the Lake Silverwood Estates HOA, a woman named Patricia LeGrand, who wore pearls like they were a badge of moral authority, decided my boat was unsightly. The boat my father spent 20 years restoring. The last gift he ever gave me, and without warning she dropped a certified letter in my mailbox like she was delivering justice. I opened it with a cup of coffee in one hand, expecting a coupon or maybe a local newsletter. What I got was a threat dressed up in Times New Roman. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you love wild, true-feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right amount of HOA chaos, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is even more jaw-dropping, and trust me, the surprises coming next, you won't want to miss them. Now for context, my father, Harlan Dorsey, was a Vietnam vet and a real estate attorney who could out-argue a judge with one eyebrow raised. He died last year, left me the lake house, the dock, and the Serenity II, a 28-foot Cumberland sloop that had more history than the HOA itself. We kept her parked on a trailer in our side yard, polished and proud like a family statue. And it wasn't like we were blocking the road or throwing. I live here with my daughter Sierra, who's 15 and got more fire in her than I ever had at that age. We spend weekends sanding teak, replacing lines, learning to rig together. It's not just a boat, it's our classroom, our therapy, our church. But according to the HOA's letter, it was aesthetic pollution and a violation of Section 6.4b. I read that line out loud and thought, what in the mayonnaise-flavored nonsense is Section 6.4? Patricia claimed all boats must be stored off-site or inside enclosed garages. Which is rich, considering half these new builds don't even have garages. They've got glass wine cellars and infinity bathtubs. The part that made my ears ring wasn't even the $100 0-cents a day fine they threatened. It was the smug signature at the bottom, Patricia LeGrand, HOA president. The way she wrote it, you'd think she was the governor. I crumpled the letter, missed the trash can by a mile, and stared at the boat like it had personally insulted someone. My house isn't even technically part of the development. It was here decades before the subdivision. My dad bought this place in 1981, before Lake Silverwood was on any real estate brochure. The property has riparian rights, something my father mentioned in passing back when I was too young to know it mattered. All I knew back then was that he loved this lake, loved this boat, and believed in doing things the right way. He told me once, "Callie, people can build fences and bylaws and fake importance, but real rights don't need a name tag." That line came back to me real fast when Sierra came in one Saturday and said, "Mom, the lady from next door was taking pictures of the boat again." Should have seen it coming. The new neighbors from the estates had been circling like seagulls ever since Patricia convinced the county to expand the HOA boundary. They called it shoreline harmony. I called it gentrified nonsense. They drove Teslas and waved with 2 fingers, the kind of wave that says, "I see you, but I don't plan to know you." Still, I kept thinking it was a misunderstanding. That's how they get you. Reasonable people trying to be reasonable with unreasonable people. So I showed up at the next HOA meeting. It was held in a fancy clubhouse with windows so big they probably had their own mortgage. Patricia sat at the center table in a pastel suit, flanked by men with watches that could sponsor a scholarship. They talked about pool renovations, pet restrictions, and community branding like they were running a Fortune 500 company. And when I raised my hand to speak, Patricia didn't even blink. The boat issue," she said, like I was a problem to be filed. I told them my property wasn't part of their development, that it was protected, deeded separately, with rights they couldn't override. Patricia smiled like I'd just told her I still believed in Santa. "The county approved an expansion," she said. "All lakefront properties now fall under our aesthetic guidelines." She called my boat Historically charming but contextually disruptive. I've heard some word salad in my day, but that was a 3-course meal. One of the board members leaned forward and said, "We're building a premium lakefront experience here. Boats on trailers lower perception values." Perception values. Like dignity was up for sale. I left that meeting with a migraine and a mission. That night, after Sierra went to bed, I dug into the old filing cabinet where my dad kept everything. And that's when I saw it. A wooden box labeled, "Open if the HOA ever comes for the dog." I stared at it like it was a message from the beyond. Maybe it was. Because let me tell you, Patricia didn't know it yet, but she'd just picked a fight with the wrong daughter of the wrong man. Walking into that HOA meeting felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already printed on the agenda. The chairs were lined up like choir pews, all aimed at a table stacked with nameplates and bad intentions. Dead center sat Patricia Legrand, the self-appointed queen of clean lawns, wearing a pastel power suit that looked like it had been ironed by regret. She didn't even glance at me, just scribbled notes like I was already a footnote. To her left was Curtis Wexler, vice president and part-time pufferfish, tapping his Mont Blanc like it was a gavel. I took a seat in the back, clutching my printouts like a kid who studied for the wrong test. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to clarify. But Patricia already had her war paint on, and I could smell the condescension from row 3. They went through landscaping updates, HLA dues, and someone's illegal bird bath like this was Congress for shrubbery. Then Patricia cleared her throat and introduced a matter of visual disruption involving unauthorized watercraft. Didn't say my name, but half the room turned to me like I'd parked a pirate ship on Main Street. I raised my hand. She called on me like I was interrupting her poetry reading. I explained, calmly, respectfully, that my property predates the HOA, bought in 1981, riparian rights, deeded separately, not under her jurisdiction. I even quoted part of the zoning clause from the original county map. Patricia stared at me like I'd just tried to explain algebra to her yoga mat. "Ms. Dorsey," she said with a smile that should have come with a legal disclaimer, "the board voted last year to expand jurisdiction for shoreline consistency. You should have received notice." Here's the thing. I didn't receive notice. I never signed anything, and my property line hadn't changed since Ronald Reagan was in office. So I told her flat out, this expansion didn't apply to me. Patricia didn't blink. She leaned into the microphone like she was announcing a bake sale and said, "All lakefront homes now fall under the aesthetic guidelines of Silverwood Estates. Uniformity is essential to community cohesion." Cohesion? That's rich coming from a woman who once fined a neighbor for using the wrong mulch color. I asked if they had documentation. She shuffled some papers dramatically like she was in a courtroom drama and said, "The county approved the extension. It's binding." Curtis jumped in just in case I didn't feel small enough. "You see, Ms. Dorsey, the issue isn't your personal history. It's visual alignment. Boats on trailers, resale perception. Resale perception. That's what this was about. Not the law, not fairness, just perception, like my family's legacy was a smudge on their lakefront fantasy. I pushed one more time, asked if the bylaws had been voted on by homeowners as required by the HOA charter. Patricia's eyes flicked down. "Procedures were followed," she said flatly. When I mentioned my deed possibly containing an exemption, she cut me off so quick it made my teeth clack. "We appreciate vintage vessels, Miss Dorsey, but rules are rules. Making one exception opens the door for everyone." Then she smiled, the kind of smile you use when you're about to bulldoze someone's garden and call it beautification. The other board members didn't say much, probably because they'd been told not to. I walked out of there feeling like I'd just been mugged with a smile. They hadn't just dismissed my defense, they'd repackaged my life story as community clutter. And the worst part? They acted like it was kindness, like I should thank them for the courtesy of warning me before they towed my dead father's boat into bureaucratic exile. Back home, I stood in the kitchen, rereading the certified letter that started it all, when Sierra walked in and handed me a mug of cocoa like she knew I needed it. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She just sat on the counter, swinging her legs, waiting for me to breathe. That's when I remembered something. A box, cherry wood, dovetailed corners, tucked deep in the bottom drawer of my dad's filing cabinet. He'd once told me jokingly, or so I thought, "Open it when the HOA gets cocky." I'd laughed back then, but now I wasn't laughing. I pulled it out, set it on the table, and stared at the brass tag. For when the HOA goes too far. That was his handwriting, his humor, his warning. Sierra looked over my shoulder, eyes wide. "You think he knew?" she whispered. I nodded slowly, hand on the lid. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew it was time to find out. Because Patricia Legrand may have thought she was the queen, but she just stepped into a game she didn't know she was playing. And I was holding my father's first move. So if you think Patricia's power trip ended with a pastel suit and a smug smile, think again, because what my father left in that cherrywood box, it didn't just change the game, it flipped the board. You're not going to want to miss what was inside or how it turned a dusty old deed into a legal landmine. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like, and stay tuned, because in the next part, we open the box and everything changes. The box creaked when I opened it, like it knew it had been waiting for a moment exactly like this. Inside wasn't treasure in the traditional sense. No gold coins, no secret keys, no dramatic confession. What there was paper. A thick manila envelope, a folded letter addressed to me in my father's sharp military handwriting, and several aged documents with seals, maps, and more legal ink than a courtroom printer. My hands were shaking, not out of fear, but because I knew whatever I was about to read wasn't casual. This wasn't a remember to check the batteries kind of letter. This was prepare for war, daughter. I unfolded the letter, took a breath, and started reading. The first line hit me like a slow-moving truck. If you're reading this, it means they finally came for the water. That's the kind of sentence that doesn't let you put the letter down. He'd been watching the developments spread around the lake for years, saw the zoning changes, the county commissions slowly bending toward money. He knew that one day someone in pearls and khaki would decide his land was too independent, and so he planned. What he left me in that box wasn't just a defense. It was a legal ambush, disguised as homework. The original 1952 deed, notarized and stamped, outlined our property's riparian rights in black and white. That meant our shoreline, 50 feet in from the water, was exempt from any external regulation unless we explicitly agreed to it. No HOA, no board, no clipboard diplomacy. I turned to Sierra, who had been reading over my shoulder. Her eyes were wide, full of something between wonder and fury. "Grandpa knew," she whispered. "He knew they'd come for the water. That's why he left us ammo." I nodded slowly, still absorbing. The truth is, my father didn't leave me millions, but he left me a chessboard, with the final move already planned. Still, I needed backup, the kind that knew the difference between legal theory and legal artillery. So I called Theo Vance, an old friend from college who now wore expensive ties and got paid to tell people what they didn't want to hear. He picked up on the third ring with his usual mix of charm and caffeine. "Calais Dorsey," he said, "to what do I owe the pleasure? And should I be worried?" I explained the situation piece by piece while texting him photos of the documents. He went quiet after the third photo, long enough that I thought we'd dropped the call. Then he said, "Callie, your dad was a genius. This is airtight. These documents don't just protect your land, they're a preemptive strike." His voice turned serious. "We don't go to them. We wait. Let them make the next move, and when they do, we bring the hammer." That was Theo's way of saying, stay calm, but document everything like your mortgage depends on it. I hung up, feeling a strange mix of power and sadness. Power because for the first time I wasn't outnumbered. I was outprepared. Sadness because my father, in his quiet, methodical way, had seen this coming. He'd watch the water get bought and sold, watch the community around him get packaged into rules and resale value, and knew someone would eventually try to erase what couldn't be replaced. So he protected it the only way he knew how, with law, precision, and foresight. I looked back at the letter. There was a final paragraph, hand-signed and smudged slightly in the corner. Some things are worth fighting for. Not because they're valuable to others, but because they're sacred to you. Take care of the serenity. And of Sierra, this isn't just about a boat. It's about who we are. My eyes welled up, but I didn't blink. I had work to do, and my father's voice in my ear. Sierra sat across the table, hugging her knees to her chest. "So what happens now?" she asked. I smiled, not out of confidence, but out of clarity. "Now?" I said. "Now we wait for Patricia to try something stupid, because when she does, we're ready." I gathered the documents, made digital copies, and stored the originals back in the box like sacred scrolls. This wasn't just going to be a battle. It was going to be a lesson. One HOA wasn't ready to learn. Because what they didn't understand was this. You can bully a neighbor, tow a trailer, issue a fine, but when you come for a legacy built by blood, sweat, and state-certified riparian law, well, then you better hope you brought a better lawyer. And, spoiler alert, Patricia? I've got mine on speed dial. What happens when Patricia doubles down and brings in a tow truck anyway? Let's just say, that cherry wood box wasn't done slapping. If you're ready to see how the HOA gets outplayed, outlawyered, and outclassed, subscribe to the channel and follow the next part, because this isn't just about a boat anymore. It's about the blowback. I was halfway through trimming the hedges when the tow truck arrived, slow rolling down our quiet street like it had mistaken drama for directions. Big white rig, dull paint, hydraulic lift groaning like it regretted its job. I wiped my hands, walked to the porch, and watched it coast into my driveway like it belonged there. The logo read Patterson Recovery Services, which was ironic since the only thing they were recovering was a lawsuit waiting to happen. The driver stepped out, mid-30s, beard, nervous posture, and looked around like he expected someone to jump out of the bushes with a clipboard. "You Miss Dorsey?" he asked, already regretting the day. I nodded. "You here for my boat? I got an order from the HOA to remove unauthorized property." He said it like it tasted bad. I smiled, reached into my back pocket, and handed him a neatly folded packet. "This is the deed," I said, "with original riparian rights, county verified. This house isn't in their HOA, and this boat's not going anywhere. If you try to tow it, you'll be violating 3 state laws, my personal space, and a dead man's legacy." His eyes dropped to the documents. You could almost see the gears grinding behind his eyes as he processed the risk. "I'm just doing what they told me," he said, shifting like the gravel beneath him had gotten hotter. "Understand," I said, still polite, "but now you're informed. If you hook that boat, I'll have your company in court so fast your tow strap won't have time to retract. And you see that camera?" I pointed up to the porch corner. "It's been recording since you arrived. Smile. You're about to become a legal example." He muttered something about calling his supervisor and stepped away to make the call. I didn't move. I just crossed my arms and waited, calm as a cat who already caught the mouse. That's when the storm arrived. Silver Mercedes, engine humming with self-importance, swerved to a stop behind the truck like it was leading a parade of poor decisions. Out stepped Patricia Legrand, HOA president and self-declared guardian of visual uniformity. She looked like she'd just walked off a catalog page titled Hostile Elegance. Pearl earrings, power suit, lips pursed so tightly you could have used her mouth to clamp wood. She marched past the truck, straight at me, heels stabbing the gravel like they had something to prove. "Why isn't the boat being removed?" she barked, not even acknowledging my existence at first. The tow guy started to stammer something about legal complications, but Patricia waved him off like a gnat. Then she turned to me. "Miss Dorsey, this is obstruction. Your property is under the HOA's jurisdiction, and this vessel is in violation of our guidelines." I didn't flinch. "That may be what your binder says," I replied, "but the law says otherwise. Riparian rights, deed exemptions. I've already called my attorney." She narrowed her eyes. "We will escalate this. You're putting yourself in legal jeopardy." I leaned forward slightly and said, "Patricia, if threats worked on me, I'd be on my third marriage by now. You came onto my property without authority. That's trespassing. You ordered a tow without jurisdiction. That's attempted theft. Keep talking. You're making my case stronger." Right on cue, a police cruiser rolled up like it had just sensed the HOA tension from a block away. Officer Kent stepped out, broad-shouldered, local, with the tired patience of a man who'd broken up more HOA spats than bar fights. He glanced between us, then said, "Afternoon, what seems to be the issue here?" Patricia opened her mouth, but I stepped forward, handed him the same legal packet, and spoke first. "My name's Callie Dorsey, this is my property. The HOA claims jurisdiction they don't have. This tow truck was ordered to remove my father's boat without legal grounds. I have documentation showing riparian rights, deed exemptions, and county confirmation that my property's not covered." Kent looked through the documents, flipping slowly, then gave me a short nod. Patricia interrupted. "Officer, this is a violation of community standards. Our board approved shoreline regulations last year, and this property—" He raised a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, I'm not here to interpret bylaws. What I see is a legal property rights dispute, which means it's a civil matter. No property is being removed today. I strongly suggest you both consult your attorneys before this escalates further." Patricia's face tightened. She looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. She spun toward the tow driver. "You were hired to do a job." He shrugged, showing her the deed I'd given him. "I don't get paid enough to drag a boat into a lawsuit." That's when I knew I'd won round one. Patricia turned on her heel and stormed back to her car, her designer bag bouncing like it was trying to escape the drama. The tow truck backed out slowly, leaving the Serenity untouched, glistening in the sun like it had just watched a legal drama and come out victorious. I walked back inside, locked the door, and called Theo. "She showed up," I said, "with a truck no less." Theo chuckled through the speaker. "And?" "And I politely handed her rope and let her tie her own knot. Cops told her to back off." "Perfect," he said. "Let her dig. The deeper the drama, the harder the fall. Keep documenting everything." I looked out the window at the boat. Still standing, still proud. I'd always thought of her as a memory. Now, she was a monument to patience. And Patricia? She just made her first big mistake. Picking a fight with someone who came armed with paperwork and a dead lawyer's foresight. I spent the rest of the afternoon uploading footage to cloud storage, printing fresh copies of everything, and noting the exact time Patricia stepped onto my land. I was done playing defense. I was documenting everything like it was going to be Exhibit A, which, let's be honest, probably would be. Sierra came home from school and asked if anything happened. I just smiled and said, "Your boat made someone scream in heels today." She grinned. "Grandpa would have loved that." I nodded. He planned for it. That night I watched the sunset from the deck, arms resting on the railing. The air felt different. Not just clearer, but sharper, like the storm had shifted. And while Patricia thought she'd rattled me, all she did was trigger the part of me she didn't see coming. The one who'd grown up learning how to fight with facts and win with silence. She was playing HOA checkers. I was holding a chessboard built by a man who planned for this 20 years ago. There's something poetic about watching a person plan their own downfall while smiling like it's a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Patricia LeGrand had that look, the kind of smugness that could only be fueled by cocktail sponsorships and unchecked power. The HOA newsletter had arrived 2 weeks earlier, printed on glossy paper like it was a wedding invitation. "You're cordially invited to the unveiling of the West Shore Lakeside Clubhouse, a transformative vision for Silverwood Estate." I read it twice, and each time it reeked more of desperation. They were pitching a $3,200,000 0-cents project with no clear vote, no financial disclosure, and plenty of architectural renderings that looked like someone Googled "Country Club for Insecure Millionaires." It was bold, it was gaudy, And it was her biggest mistake yet. Theo, Judge Eleanor Hart, and I met beforehand in my kitchen, which now doubled as our legal war room. Between us sat 3 labeled folders: fraudulent amendments, bidding irregularities, conflict of interest. It felt like prepping for trial, except instead of a judge, we were presenting to homeowners with wine glasses and property anxieties. "Let her pitch it," Eleanor said, flipping through her notes. "Let her sell the dream. Then we wake them up with evidence." Theo grinned. "You realize this is going to be like interrupting a Broadway show with an audit." "Exactly," I said, slipping on a blazer. "Time for Patricia to learn that running a community isn't the same as running a con." The event was held at the existing clubhouse, now decked out in fairy lights and catered platters, like it was prom night for real estate power grabs. The parking lot overflowed with luxury SUVs. Inside, a scale model of the proposed lakeside facility sat under a spotlight, surrounded by residents sipping Chardonnay and whispering about investment returns. Patricia stood next to it like Vanna White with an agenda. Her brother James, CEO of Le Grand Property Group, stood nearby posing as just the contractor. That would have been cute if it wasn't illegal. When Patricia tapped her champagne flute to get everyone's attention, I knew it was showtime. She launched into a speech about unifying vision, lifestyle enhancement, and modern community identity, sprinkling in just enough buzzwords to make people forget they were getting fleeced. She didn't mention that no proper vote had taken place. She didn't mention the 2/3 requirement for any budget-altering projects, and she certainly didn't mention that her brother's company had won the bid without competition. But we did. When they opened the floor to questions, I waited just long enough for the room to settle, then raised my hand. Patricia hesitated just for a second, then called on me like she wished I'd disappear. "Mrs. Dorsey?" "Yes," I said clearly, stepping forward. "I just have one question. In the construction plans you presented, I noticed the dock extension crosses into the protected riparian area deeded to my property. How exactly do you plan to build on land you don't own and can't touch?" Silence. A few heads turned. Patricia's smile flickered like a bad signal. James jumped in, trying to soften the blow. "I'm sure any easements or legacy clauses can be resolved through negotiation." I didn't move, except they can't. My deed is grandfathered, my rights are permanent, and this project as designed violates them. Eleanor stood next, her voice calm but packed with weight. "As a retired federal judge, I can confirm those documents are enforceable, and attempting to override them could expose the HOA and the investors to significant liability." Murmurs started. That's when Theo walked up with the third punch. "Also, the construction contract awarded to Le Grand Property Group. Can we see documentation on the competitive bidding process? Because state law requires bids on projects exceeding $100,000, 0 cents. And we couldn't find any public notice or alternate proposal on record." Patricia froze. James went pale. The crowd went quiet, like someone had hit pause on the illusion. And then the questions came. One resident asked about the sudden dues increase, another about the HOA's financials. Someone near the back asked, "Isn't that your brother's company?" Patricia tried to regroup, but it was too late. The room had turned. She sputtered something about ungrateful disruption and protecting value, but nobody was listening anymore. The dream had cracked, and underneath was the mess she'd worked so hard to hide. As the whispers turned to murmurs and then into direct questions, investors started packing up their pamphlets and model diagrams like the market had just crashed. Patricia's voice grew sharp, desperate. "This project was for all of us, to elevate our community." I said nothing. I didn't have to. The truth was doing the talking now. Eleanor leaned over and whispered, "She wasn't running a homeowners association. She was running a monarchy with quarterly dues." Theo chuckled. "And the peasants just found the receipts." I watched as Patricia clutched the edge of the model dock like holding on would stop her credibility from sinking. But nothing could. One of the investors, an older man in a gray suit, looked at her and said, "We don't fund lawsuits. Let us know if you get your legal house in order." Then he turned and walked out, taking half the crowd with him. The gala had turned into an exposé. The clubhouse lights still twinkled, but the only thing illuminating the room now was accountability. Patricia stood there, surrounded by silence, her vision project melting under the weight of truth. And me? I just stood back and smiled. Not because I was smug, but because my father was right. Some battles don't need noise, they just need the right paper, the right people, and the right moment. By the next board meeting, Patricia's crown was hanging by a thread, and not the silk kind, the unraveling kind. Word had spread like barbecue smoke at a 4th of July cookout. Conflict of interest, illegal amendments, a clubhouse scam, and, everyone's favorite HOA sin, misuse of funds. The room was standing room only, not because folks wanted updates on pool filters, but because they smelled something rotten behind all that lavender landscaping. When Patricia stood to speak, she didn't even reach her second sentence before Eleanor gently but firmly requested a vote of confidence. It wasn't a coup, it was a correction, and it wasn't close. 89% of residents voted for her immediate resignation. I didn't say a word. I just watched her walk out with the same click-clack heels she'd once used to stomp around my driveway. Funny how power sounds different when it's leaving. Within a week, the HOA board received a formal letter from Theo's office outlining our settlement terms, an immediate cease and desist on all actions regarding my property, an official acknowledgement of my riparian rights, and a $25,000 0-cents damages payout. Their insurance company practically fell over themselves to sign the dotted line. Turns out, fraud backed by ego makes for an expensive legal liability. I didn't need the money to prove a point, but as my father used to say, even principle deserves a paycheck. Eleanor was elected HOA president unanimously, and her first official act was to issue a public apology to the community, and to me. I sat in the back as she stood before a packed room and said, "We forgot who we were serving, but we remember now." That wasn't just redemption, that was repair. I used part of the settlement money to restore the Serenity II. Fresh varnish, new lines, and a navy blue hull that gleamed in the sun like a rebuke to every letter Patricia ever mailed. But I didn't stop there. I used the rest to turn the parcel next to my dock, the one my dad had always mowed out of habit, into something better. Riparian Park, a place for neighborhood kids to learn to sail, ask questions, and understand what the word rights actually means. No one asked for it. But once it opened, families showed up every Saturday like it was the town's best-kept secret. And right at the center of it was Sierra, standing on the deck of the Serenity, teaching kids how to tie a bowline. Her voice steady, her posture proud. My daughter wasn't just sailing a boat. She was steering a legacy. One Saturday morning, while she was showing a group of 10-year-olds how to rig a sail, I sat on the dock flipping through a box of old photos. At the bottom was something I'd never noticed before, a second compartment built into the underside of the lid. Inside was another note from my father, written on a weathered scrap of legal pad. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were as clear as ever. "Justice is the wind. Use it well, daughter." I sat there for a long moment, letting those words land like anchors. He knew. He always knew. Not just that the HOA would come knocking, but that I'd need reminding that justice isn't about volume. It's about direction. You don't scream into the storm, you tack into it. With patience. With purpose. It's funny how things come full circle. The boat they tried to erase became the reason the community came back to life. The neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved and brought cookies. Even Curtis Wexler, former HOA vice president and part-time Rolex enthusiast, stopped by with his grandson to sign up for sailing lessons. "Never thought I'd be asking for permission to use your dock," he said with a sheepish grin. He told him, "We don't do permission here, we do community." And we meant it, because it was never about revenge. It was about reclamation, of space, of story, of something bigger than one woman's vanity project. And as the sun set behind the lake, painting the water gold, I realized I'd gotten something better than a legal victory. I'd built a place where no one else would have to fight that battle again. And that's how a wooden boat, a buried deed, and a stubborn daughter turned an HOA scandal into a neighborhood revival. I didn't just keep the serenity, I gave her a new purpose. What started as one woman trying to erase my history became a movement that taught my daughter, my neighbors, and maybe even a few board members that the past doesn't need permission to matter. My father didn't fight battles with fists. He fought them with foresight, preparation, and calm. And in the end, that's what won. Not rage, not revenge, just a quiet confidence in what's right, backed by paper and principle. If you've listened all the way through, then you already know this story wasn't just about a boat. It was about protecting the things that carry memory. It was about showing a new generation that legacy matters more than landscaping guidelines. It was about standing up, not with noise, but with knowledge. In a world full of noise, that might be the most powerful act of all. So if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of your own family's legacy, or if it gave you hope that standing your ground with grace still means something, then let us know. Leave a comment, hit like, tap subscribe, because we're just getting started. The next story might be about a fence, or a tree, or a rule someone tried to twist. But what it's really about is people like you and me, fighting to protect what matters most. Stick around, the wind's still blowing.